Well, hello, everyone, and welcome to this week's edition of Ridin the Storm Out. I am Paul Blair, and this to my left is
Dan Fisher.
And together we are trying to wreck this church. Well, it was once a great church. Fairview Baptist Church of Edmond, Liberty Church of Edmond is what we call ourselves a lot now. Although our entity officially hasn't changed, we just are pushing the Liberty Church movement. And of course, our podcasts every week are to try to share with you, our audience, and you pastors that are checking in with us, a biblical perspective on current cultural events. And of course, Dan, one of the things that we both scratch our heads over is we recognize just how little people actually know about what the Constitution actually is. You know, people wave the Constitution around. I don't think they even have the slightest idea what it is, what it's supposed to do. They don't understand anything about our republic.
They do not.
And of course, one of the most crazy accusations recently is the allegations by the left, and then the acceptance by many on the right, thinking that Roe versus Wade being overturned is going to make abortion illegal across all 50 United States. Tell us a little bit, because you certainly know as well as anybody the background.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about Roe v. Wade. What exactly did it do, and what does the reversal of it do?
Yeah, well, what Roe v. Wade did is it borrowed a right that doesn't exist in the Constitution, this right of privacy.
Made out of whole cloth.
Yeah. Now, of course, we do have the Fourth and Fifth Amendment that protect us against improper seizure and invasion of who we are, but nothing in the Constitution said that you could hide behind that and murder your preborn child.
Right.
So it's just not there. They pulled it out of thin air. And actually, for decades, Paul, even Rehnquist, one of our Supreme Court justices, admitted that Roe v. Wade was horrible law. So even those that have been centrist to leaning left have admitted, I mean, even for Ginsburg, she admitted, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, that Roe v. Wade was bad jurisprudence. So basically what Roe v. Wade did is, borrowing a right that really doesn't exist in the Constitution, it demanded that abortion become a constitutional right in all 50 states. And before that, though, states were actually outlawing abortion. And this is why, of course, Roe v. Wade was such a big thing, because the federal government steps in, takes a right upon themselves that they don't have, and force it on all 50 states. So all the overturn of Roe v. Wade does is it puts us back to where we were before Roe v. Wade.
73. That's right.
Exactly right. So in essence, it puts it back to the states. And I even hesitate to say put it back on the states, because it was always on the states to begin with.
The last 50 years has been a joke.
Yeah, and if you read Federalist 45, where James Madison was trying to clarify what powers this new central that we call federal government would have, he made it clear. I mean, you could practically quote it, Paul. I hear you do it all the time. That basically everything that affects people's individual lives is left with the states. And the federal government basically is over international stuff and squabbles between states.
Federalist 45 said in times of war is when the federal government is going to be most visible. Times of peace, which is here in our own 50 states, most all the time.
You know,
split the states.
If there were disputes between states or disputes between a citizen of a state and the federal government or whatever, then the Supreme Court might have to step in. But they were never, ever created to do the kind of stuff that we've seen happen. So here's the fallacy. The people on the left are yelling that abortion is now illegal. Well, it's only illegal if they live in a state that made it illegal. The other mistake, though, that I fear that a lot of Christians are making is they believe that abortions have ceased. Well, only if their state outlawed it, like in Oklahoma. In most states, I will argue that not only will abortion not change, it will change, it'll get worse. Because in these blue states, they're going to expand the right of abortion. In fact, California, I don't know how serious this is going to be, but there have been some in California arguing that parents ought to have 30 days after the birth to be able to murder their child.
And the reality is, Dan, there's only so far that the civil governing authority can go.
Of course.
Like in Oklahoma, as you said. And by the way, just a summary, prior to 1973 Roe versus Wade, states could decide whether abortion was legal within their own borders or not. It was the illegal Supreme Court decision. By the way, they're supposed to offer opinions. The idea that
not
courts
rulings.
We don't have rulings in America. We aren't ruled by a court. And the Constitution was what created you had the states that already existed. The Constitution was what created, the states used to create and design and define the authority and responsibility, the limited general government. So the states created the federal government and not the other way around.
And they even called the Constitution a compact.
Compact, that's
It was an agreement
between the states.
Between
It wasn't a
sovereign
suicide pact.
entities.
That's exactly right.
And it was sovereign entities that were entering into this compact.
Right.
And Paul, I would argue that if they had thought that once they got in, there would never be an exit, they would have never gotten in.
I agree with you.
Because if you go back to the 13 original states that were previously colonies, they were so diverse that you couldn't even have a one-size-fits-all with 13, much less 50 states.
Right. Well, they created this limited general government. The states delegated, as it says in Federalist 45, few and defined powers to the federal government.
Right, and you'll find those Article 2, Section 8.
They reserved to themselves everything else, unless they specifically said, federal government, you can do this, and you can do this. Everything else we get to do. We retain the right. They don't give us the right. We retain the right.
That's right. And the powers that were delegated to the federal government were not forever delegated. Right. Delegated means to be loaned. We could take those back if we so decided.
That's exactly right.
Exactly. Yeah.
And the whole idea of the federal government imposing the murder of preborn children violates our nation or our country's birth certificate.
Yeah, the Declaration.
The Declaration says that the purpose of governments is to secure, not to give us unalienable rights. We already have God-given unalienable rights. Point. The Constitution was to, or the purpose of government is to secure our unalienable rights. And then it lists three primary: life, the right to life. You can't have your life arbitrarily taken away from you without due process.
And of course, the other liberties won't matter if you don't have
dead.
that
That's
one.
Exactly
That's
right.
Exactly right.
Liberty and the pursuit of happiness.
Yeah.
Now, the right to life is clearly defined as numero uno, as you said. If you're not alive, the other rights really don't matter.
No, they don't matter.
So the idea that any judge anywhere, much less a 7-2 decision, could create this right to privacy to where one individual could kill another completely separate individual that happened to be inside her body.
Different DNA, different fingerprint, different blood
gender,
type, many times.
You name it.
Yeah.
Its own head, own skeletal system, own lungs, own heart, a completely different person. The idea that the Supreme Court could just make it a law, which they can't, but they did because we don't know any better, to where abortion was legal in all 50 states. It was always wrong, as you said a while ago.
Yeah.
Justice Ginsburg and others recognized that it was wrong from the get-go.
It was wrong.
Now we finally had a court that was honest enough to say, hey, this was wrong. We're reversing course.
Yeah.
So abortion is not illegal in all 50 states. It is still legal in states that want to keep abortion legal.
Yeah.
And it's illegal in states that don't want to have abortion illegal.
So like in Oklahoma, before Roe v. Wade, we actually outlawed abortion in Oklahoma. And if you go back and read our state constitution, it says that any intentional ending of a preborn child's life is by definition murder. But then when Roe v. Wade was passed, we added except if it's done by a doctor.
So we have licenses to kill, or we
exactly if you're a doctor. And so what Oklahoma had done is we had passed a number of trigger laws, and then recently our governor had signed into law basically a law that almost eliminates 99.9% of all abortions anyway. So when Roe v. Wade is taken off of us, and the state of Oklahoma can decide for Oklahoma what we're going to do, abortion is illegal here.
Right.
But Christians need to remember that abortion didn't all of a sudden become illegal in Illinois.
Right.
Where it's very legal in Illinois,
Liberal
and probably will get
still
worse.
Now let me ask you, what are the three branches of government, and which one alone has the authority entrusted to it to craft law?
Supreme Court.
No.
It's the
answer.
Supreme.
Try again. I forgot.
They're
That's
supreme.
Right.
They're at the
issue
top.
rulings and rule over their subjects. Oh, of course.
Yeah.
That's what Thomas Jefferson and everybody had in mind when they declared independence. We're going to create another tyranny. That's great.
So it's the executive branch that makes laws.
Exactly. We elect a king for 4 years, and whatever he says goes.
No,
Nope, wrong again. No.
Well, that leaves legislative.
Yeah, you're getting close.
How about
The legislative is made up of two branches, right?
Yeah. We have Congress made up of the House of Representatives.
Representing the people.
Answers directly to the people. That's why it's called the People's House.
Right.
And then you have the Senate, which is supposed to be looking out for the sovereignty of each state.
Yeah, at one time they did.
Yeah, until they were elected popularly.
Until the early 1900s. Yeah, until the early 1900s.
Yeah, 17th Amendment.
The senators were appointed by state legislatures. So you had the Senate, which represented the states, the House, which represented the people. That was the only one of the three branches that could make law. And then, in that case, only in the areas of delegated authority.
That's exactly right.
So they didn't have the unlimited authority to make law.
No, of course not.
But the Supreme Court has no authority to make law. They can offer opinions, and they don't have the ability to enforce.
No, they have no enforcement arm whatsoever. In fact, the framers, one of the insurances they thought they had against a runaway Supreme Court is that the Supreme Court has no police force. It has no military to enforce its opinions. And so they would be the least dangerous of actually the three branches.
Right.
Yeah.
And they've become the most dangerous instead.
Oh, yeah, because we misunderstood what they're to do.
Intentionally misunderstood.
I think you're right.
And the president, we see a president today that sits down on day one and signs a stack of executive
you've
orders.
gone through that. It's
Wasn't
unbelievable.
supposed to be that way. Our founding era presidents, a total of 36 years, those men that were alive during the War for Independence,
do that.
They went on to serve the first 5 presidential administrations, from Washington to John Adams to Thomas Jefferson to James Madison, James Monroe. 36 years. Of course, John Adams only served one term.
Yep.
So he had 4 presidents, serve 8 years, 1 president, serve 4 years. All that together, 36 years, those 5 presidents issued a total of
462.
Little high.
341.
Lower.
240.
Lower.
106.
Lower. About your IQ.
About 15 or 16.
That's it. 15 executive orders. That was it. 36 years, 5 presidents issued a combined 15 executive orders and 10 vetoes.
Yeah.
Because that era knew that we weren't electing a king to rule. He was supposed to be the chief executive carrying out the will of the people as was executed through the legislature.
And those executive orders, we might add, were not issued to circumvent the law or the Constitution. They were pretty simple procedural kind of things.
There was a time there, too, Dan, where there might be an emergency. When
of
Congress
course.
wasn't in session.
And no internet,
and
telephones.
Like today, you couldn't get on an email or a Zoom call. You couldn't take a Lear jet or a net jet and get back to Washington, D.C.
That's right.
It might take 6 weeks to get from your state back to Washington. So there had to be the allowance for the president to act in cases of emergency.
Well, it took the delegates to the Continental Congress all summer to sign the Declaration of Independence. See, we get this idea they all signed it on July the 4th. No,
they all flew
took
in.
them all summer.
They all flew in. They met in the Admirals Club at Reagan National and had a signing down there. That's where the picture of painting was.
Painting.
Yep. That was Admirals Club at Reagan National.
I need to look at that again.
Yeah, you trust me on that one.
That's fantastic. So the deal is, they knew that there would be times when the president would have to act because of the absence of Congress.
Right.
And everybody else.
Now we treat it as if you can just steal the election, and you can put a king in power that can do whatever he wants to do.
Yeah.
And that's what we're seeing happen right
No,
now.
exactly. And they'll even issue, Biden has admitted this, they'll issue executive orders that they know are unconstitutional, but they can ride the clock and be able to do illegal things until the court finally slaps them down and says, no, that's unconstitutional. And they knew it was unconstitutional.
So basically, to summarize, and we one other point that's really some good news here. But summarize, as the Constitution was the instrument that which 13 sovereign states created a limited general government, delegated few powers to that general government, and then defined what each department was supposed to do.
Yes.
And you had the 3 branches. Only the legislative branch has the authority to make law. The Supreme Court cannot make law, never have been able to make law. They can offer opinions.
Yep.
And the chief executive is supposed to carry out the will of the people.
And he can't make law, even with the executive order.
That's exactly right. That's not law.
Yeah.
But what we have seen is and quite frankly, I love this quote, Woodrow Wilson, back before he was president, in the late 1800s, I think 1887, made a statement.
You're a Woodrow Wilson lover,
I love Woodrow Wilson. Hate that guy. He said, what one generation would resist, but eventually give in and accept, The next generation would accept it because their parents did, and every successive generation would just assume that that's the way it's always operated. That's what we've been doing. We think
That's
that whatever
exactly
the Supreme
right.
Court says goes. We think that when the president sits down and writes an executive order, that's now a law. It's important that we, the people, remember exactly what the Constitution does and doesn't do. There is no constitutional right to privacy.
No.
Roe versus Wade was made up to begin with.
Yes.
Roe versus Wade being reversed as the right decision. Even Ruth Bader Ginsburg has agreed with that.
Yeah.
And it doesn't end abortion. I only wish it did, but it gives it back to the states, which is where it really belonged all along.
That's exactly right.
And states that are conservative, that don't believe we ought to murder our preborn innocent children, have made it illegal.
Yeah, exactly.
And states that are godless and hedonistic and heathens and are going to wind up rotting in hell one of these days, like California and New York and Massachusetts,
could
make it legal if they
Well,
want to.
here's something I'd like to mention here before we wrap it up. Why it's so important to understand about the executive orders. I've had a lot of people ask me, well, didn't President Trump do away with the Johnson Amendment because he signed an executive order? He couldn't. The Johnson Amendment was passed by Congress, unfortunately, so it would have to be undone by Congress. All he did with that executive order was to order the IRS not to prosecute based upon the Johnson Amendment. So folks need to know that. And that executive order, I think, was thwarted by our president, I think.
And isn't
sure.
it sad that a Republican Congress wouldn't reverse that when we had the opportunity to do so?
Yeah,
First
or
2 years.
Obamacare.
Or Obamacare. That's exactly right. That's exactly right.
Yeah.
So as we're sitting here, one good thing that's come from all this, Dan, is that you're hearing states like California, liberal states, saying we need to secede. Wait, the Supreme Court doesn't have the authority to make those decisions. Well, I would say you're right. Isn't it wonderful that it's taken something like this for the liberal states that have made a living on the overreach of the Supreme Court, now saying the Supreme Court doesn't have the authority because they're right. The Supreme Court doesn't rule over us. Also, they're right when, as you said a while ago, this is not a suicide pact.
No.
It's a compact that we entered into.
That's right.
And quite frankly, if 49 states vote and decide they want to drive into the pit of hell, I want to be a part of a state that says, no, we don't want to drive
pass
into the pit of
on
hell.
that.
We'll pass on that.
Yeah.
So fortunately, it's taken something like this to cause the liberal states to actually lead out and do the right thing. All I can say is let's say more power to you, and let's recognize exactly what the Constitution was.
You know what's so funny though, the way these leftists change when everything's going their way. They say if you talk about pulling out, you're unconstitutional and you're wrong.
A traitor,
But the minute it doesn't go their way, then they start talking about pulling out. Isn't it funny how the standards are moving all the time for them?
And isn't it funny how now they're calling it activist judges ruling from the bench?
Exactly.
Seems like I've heard that before.
And all they did was say, no, we didn't have the right to rule from the bench. You do in your states.
The bottom line is, as we have talked about over and over and over again, and hopefully you guys are getting it, 325 million people aren't going to agree about anything.
No.
There's just no way. The only way 325 million people can function in unity is if they have one supreme commander, a dictator that tells them what to do.
And can enforce it with
guns. Can enforce it, that's right.
Yeah.
Or we have states and have federalism where conservative states can be conservative if they want to, and liberal states can be liberal if they want to, but we agree to work together for our common defense and for our general welfare.
And the conservatives that find themselves living in a liberal state have the right to move
exactly right.
to a conservative state.
That's exactly right.
And vice versa for the lefties that want to go to where it's really liberal.
Is this actually technically part of the Enlightenment, since we're enlightening people on these issues?
I don't know that you and I could ever be accused of being enlightening. That may be going a little too far.
You want to sign off? You want me to?
I would be happy to do so. Guys, we want to thank you for joining us. For those of you who are pastors, hopefully this is helpful to you. You need to share this stuff with your people in whatever way you think is best. I believe it's easy to bring the Bible in and explain these kinds of things, but we hope these podcasts are helpful to you, and we just pray that we can be a partner with you to help you along the way. We don't think we've learned it all up, but we try to share what we do know. And until the next time, this is Paul and Dan saying,
God bless you. We're riding the storm out together.